The silver research vessel shuddered as another gravitational wave slammed into its hull. James Thorne gripped his console, dark eyes fixed on the swirling purple anomaly ahead. 3 years of searching, and he'd finally found it, the theoretical space-time distortion that could revolutionize human understanding of faster-than-light travel. "Come on, just a few more readings," he muttered, fingers dancing across holographic displays as his ship's sensors strained to collect data. The gravitational forces were far stronger than his calculations had predicted, but he couldn't turn back now. This discovery could change everything. Warning klaxons blared as the ship's structural integrity began to fail. James's eyes widened as new readings flashed across his screen. The anomaly wasn't just bending space, it was tearing it. A spatial rift crackled into existence directly ahead, its edges crackling with purple-white energy. "Computer, emergency withdraw dash," the command died in his throat as an invisible force yanked his ship forward. The rift swallowed him whole, reality twisting into impossible geometries around him. James's consciousness flickered as G-forces threatened to tear him apart. When he came to, his ship was plummeting through an alien atmosphere. Through the viewport, he glimpsed crystalline spires rising from an iridescent landscape before damage alerts consumed his attention. The engines were dead, life support failing, and the ground was rushing up far too quickly. James diverted all remaining power to the emergency gravitational dampeners and braced for impact. The crash felt like being caught in an avalanche, a cascade of shrieking metal and shattering crystal that seemed to last forever. When silence finally fell, he was amazed to find himself alive, though his body screamed in protest as he moved. Through the cracked viewport, he saw he'd crashed into some kind of crystal garden. The air was breathable according to his readings, which was both a relief and a scientific impossibility he'd have to contemplate later. Right now, he needed to assess the damage and send a distress signal. That's when he saw them, tall, ethereal figures approaching through the crystal formations. Their skin shimmered with an opalescent blue-white sheen, and they moved with an otherworldly grace. First contact. His heart raced with equal parts excitement and trepidation. The beings stopped a few meters from his ship, their expressions unreadable. James raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace and carefully emerged from the wreckage. "I come in peace," he said, knowing they wouldn't understand but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. "My ship was caught in a spatial anomaly dash." Pain exploded in his mind, white-hot needles boring into his thoughts. He collapsed to his knees, gasping. Through tears of agony, he saw one of the beings holding out a slender hand, fingers splayed toward him. "Primitive creature," a voice echoed in his head. "You dare to violate the sacred grounds of the Kiara with your crude machine?" They were telepathic. Of course they were telepathic. James struggled to form coherent thoughts through the pain. "Not intentional, accident, please." "It speaks?" Another mental voice, tinged with surprise. "How fascinating. And yet look how it struggles with even basic telepathic communication. Truly primitive." The pain subsided enough for James to catch his breath. "I'm a scientist," he managed to say aloud. "A researcher. I mean no harm." "Your kind always says that," the first voice responded. "Yet everywhere you go, destruction follows. We have watched your species, James Thorne. Your wars. Your pollution. Your endless appetite for resources. You call yourselves civilized, but you are savages wearing the thin veneer of technology you barely understand." They'd been watching Earth? James filed that revelation away for later consideration. "If you've been watching us, then you've also seen our capacity for growth. Our art. Our music. Our drive to explore and understand the universe. We have seen enough." A new figure stepped forward, taller than the others, wearing elaborately patterned robes that seemed to shift and flow like liquid crystal. "Take him to the analysis chamber. Let us see what other secrets this human mind holds." Two of the Kiarans seized James's arms, their touch sending tingles of electric energy through his body. As they led him away, he caught glimpses of a vast crystal city stretching to the horizon. Under other circumstances, he would have been ecstatic to study such advanced civilization. Now, he could only hope their analysis wouldn't prove fatal. The analysis chamber proved to be a spherical room whose walls pulsed with geometric patterns of light. They secured him to a chair that seemed to grow from the crystal floor itself, its restraints cold against his skin. James tried to focus on his scientific training, observe, analyze, record mentally for later study, but fear kept intruding. What exactly were they planning to do to him? Your species fears what it does not understand, the robed leader observed, approaching with several others. Yet you also desire knowledge with an intensity that borders on madness. This contradiction intrigues us. Understanding is how we overcome fear, James replied. Let me prove humans can be more than what you think we are. You will prove nothing. We will take what knowledge we desire from your mind, and then decide your fate. The patterns on the walls began to spin, and James felt consciousness slipping away as alien minds pressed against his own. His last thought was a bitter appreciation of the irony. He'd wanted to make a groundbreaking discovery, and he had. He just might not survive to tell anyone about it. The next days passed in a blur of invasive mental probes and clinical examinations. The Kiarans treated him like a particularly interesting laboratory specimen, discussing his responses and behaviors as if he couldn't understand them. But through the haze of tests and telepathic intrusions, James noticed things. The way their technology seemed to blend the organic and crystalline. The subtle hierarchies in how they interacted. The hints that their supposed technological superiority might not be as complete as they claimed. Most importantly, he noticed their surprise when he began to adapt to their telepathic communications, his mind developing calluses against their mental touch. They hadn't expected that. Already, their favorite theory about human primitive nature was showing cracks. James allowed himself a small smile. They thought humans were savages. They were about to learn just how adaptable savages could be. The gentle hum of crystal technology had become a constant companion in James's cell. 2 weeks into his captivity, he'd learned to distinguish the different frequencies, security fields, environmental controls, and something deeper, more fundamental to the Kiaran's infrastructure. His engineer's mind couldn't help but map it all, even as they continued their relentless examination of his consciousness. A subtle shift in the ambient energy made him look up. Through the translucent walls, he saw a familiar figure approaching, Vena Drow, one of the younger researchers. She moved with the characteristic Kiaran grace, but there was something different about her manner today. Tension, perhaps? Your mind grows stronger, she observed as she deactivated the security field. The others find it concerning. Adaptation is what we do best, James replied, both verbally and telepathically. The dual communication was becoming more natural, though it still gave him headaches. Though I admit, some of your colleagues' methods of testing that adaptation are intense. You refer to primary researcher Cole's pain threshold experiments. There was a flicker of something like disapproval in her mental tone. Not all of us agree with his aggressive approach. That was new. Until now, the Kiarans had presented a unified front of scientific detachment. Before James could probe this potential divide, another presence entered his mind, sharper, more focused than any he'd encountered before. Researcher Drow, you were instructed to prepare the specimen for the cognition trials, not engage it in conversation. The newcomer appeared in the doorway, her robes shimmering with patterns that marked her high status. Unlike the others, whose skin tones ran toward pale blue, hers was a deep indigo that seemed to absorb light. Her eyes fixed on James with an intensity that made his previous examinations feel superficial. Chief Researcher Naira Voss, she introduced herself, the mental contact precise and controlled. Your case has been transferred to my division. James straightened instinctively. He'd heard the other researchers mention her name in hushed mental whispers. Should I be honored or worried? That depends on what I find. She turned to Venna. Leave us. Once they were alone, Naira approached his cell's barrier. The patterns in her robes shifted, forming complex equations that James recognized from his own research into spatial mechanics. A test? The third variant is incorrect, he said before he could stop himself. That configuration would create a recursive loop in the quantum field. Naira's eyes narrowed. You understand advanced spatial mathematics? Enough to know that's the equation that nearly got me killed when the rift collapsed. He gestured to the pattern. If you adjust the quantum variance here and here, it stabilizes. The equations on her robes shifted, incorporating his suggestion. Fascinating. Your species barely understands interplanetary travel, yet you grasp concepts that took our scientists generations to develop. Maybe because we had to work for our understanding instead of inheriting it, James suggested. When did your civilization last truly innovate, rather than just refining what your ancestors built? Pain lanced through his mind, but it was brief, a warning, not a punishment. You overstep, human. Do I? Or am I just asking questions you've been avoiding? Naira studied him for a long moment. The equations on her robes grew more complex, shifting into three-dimensional forms that hung in the air between them. Solve it, she commanded. James immersed himself in the problem, grateful for the intellectual challenge after weeks of being treated like a lab animal. The equation was brilliant but flawed, describing a theoretical energy transfer system that would lose coherence at precisely the wrong moment. He rearranged variables in his mind, watching Naira's expression as the solution took shape. Impossible, she whispered in his mind as he completed the final calculation. That approach shouldn't work. But it does, James said. Your system assumes perfect efficiency. Ours account for chaos, for imperfection. Sometimes the flaw in the design becomes its greatest strength. Like your species' remarkable adaptability despite your primitive nature? There was something new in her mental tone, curiosity warring with deep-rooted prejudice. We adapt because we have to. Because we're not perfect, and we know it. When you start from zero, every step forward is progress. Naira's hand reached toward the barrier, then stopped. You are either more than you appear, or the most convincing proof of our superiority I have yet encountered. I look forward to discovering which. Over the next few days, Naira's tests proved different from the others. Where they had sought to categorize and dismiss him, she challenged him. Complex mathematical proofs. Engineering problems. Philosophical debates that stretched late into the night. Through it all, James felt her watching, evaluating, trying to reconcile his capabilities with her preconceptions about human limitations. Then came the day everything changed. James was deep in a discussion with Naira about quantum entanglement when the crystal walls around them pulsed with urgent energy. Emergency signals flashed through the telepathic network, something about power fluctuations in the city's core systems. This is not your concern, Naira said sharply when she caught him analyzing the patterns. The oscillation frequency is destabilizing, James insisted. If those patterns mean what I think they mean, you have maybe an hour before dash. Silence. But he felt her probe his thoughts, saw her eyes widen as she recognized the validity of his warning. Chief Researcher. Venna's mental call carried panic. The core containment fields are failing. Primary Researcher Cole's attempts to boost power output have created a cascade effect. Naira's composure cracked. Evacuate the lower levels. I will. Let me help, James interrupted. You know I understand the principles involved. You've tested me on them for days. And risk you sabotaging our most sacred technology? Risk letting me prove humans can be more than savages. He met her gaze steadily. Your choice, Chief Researcher. Trust the primitive, or watch your city fall. For 3 heartbeats, Naira stood frozen in decision. Then her hand passed through the barrier, grasping his arm. If you betray this trust, your death will be slow. James allowed himself a small smile as she released his restraints. Let's hope your ancestors built something a savage can understand. The crystalline corridors of the city. The council chamber was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture, its soaring dome refracting the light of Kiara's twin suns into countless rainbow patterns. Under other circumstances, James would have been fascinated by the engineering involved. Now, standing before the assembled council members with Naira at his side, he focused on keeping his mind calm and shielded, a trick she'd taught him during their late-night discussions. You claim this human not only accessed our most sacred technology but merged with its consciousness? First speaker Torin's mental voice rippled with disbelief. The ancient Kieran's skin had faded to almost white with age, and patterns of light danced beneath its surface. Chief Researcher Voss, your reputation for brilliance does not excuse this breach of protocol. With respect, James said, deliberately speaking aloud to make his point, your sacred technology was about to tear itself apart. The protocol breach saved your city. The human speaks out of turn, another council member observed. Perhaps its time in captivity has made it forget its place. James Thorne speaks with my authorization, Naira interjected smoothly. And his insights into the incident have revealed something the council must hear. She gestured, and the chamber's ambient lighting shifted. Holographic displays materialized around them, showing the neural pathways James had discovered in the city's systems. Our ancestors built more than mere machines. The technology that powers our civilization is alive. Murmurs of shock and denial rippled through the council. James felt the pressure of their combined mental scrutiny, but his defenses held. Naira's presence beside him helped. They'd grown accustomed to sharing mental space during their work together. Even if this is true, first speaker Torin said, it does not explain why. The chamber's lights flickered. Every crystal surface pulsed with sudden, urgent energy. James and Naira exchanged alarmed looks. They recognized the pattern from their communion with the city's consciousness. Security breach in the ancient archives, a mental alert broadcast through the network. Unknown energy signature detected. That's impossible, James said. The archives are supposed to be sealed. They were, Naira replied, her thoughts tight with concern. For thousands of years. But the power fluctuations during the crisis. Council members will remain here for safety, Torin commanded. Security teams will. No time, James interrupted. Whatever's down there, it's interfacing with the city's systems. I can feel it through the neural pathways. Naira? I sense it too. She turned to the council. First speaker, request permission to investigate personally. James's connection to the city's consciousness may be crucial. You would risk our most sacred historical repository on the intuition of a primitive species? Your sacred repository is already at risk, James pointed out. And this primitive species helped save your city once already today. The chamber trembled as another energy surge pulsed through the crystal networks. Warning signals flashed through the telepathic grid, system after system falling to some kind of viral attack that spread through the neural pathways. Go, Torin commanded. But know that if any harm comes to the archives, the consequences will be severe. James and Naira were already running. The archives lay deep beneath the city, accessed by a crystal elevator that responded to Naira's genetic signature. As they descended, James felt the viral attack intensifying, corrupting the city's systems. It's like it knows the pathways, he muttered. Like it's been waiting for a chance to wake up. The archives contain technology and knowledge from the height of our civilization, Naira explained. Most of it too dangerous to risk using. My people chose stability over progress, sealed away anything that might disrupt our perfect society. Nothing stays sealed forever. The elevator stopped, opening onto a vast chamber filled with crystalline storage units. Especially not things that want to be found. They moved cautiously through the archives, following the trail of activated systems. James felt an increasing pressure in his mind, not Kieran telepathy, but something older, alien even to them. Beside him, Naira's mental shields tightened. There, she pointed to a pulsing crystal matrix near the center of the chamber. That storage unit contains records from the First Contact era, when our ancestors first achieved interstellar travel. As they approached, holographic displays sparked to life around them. James saw images of ancient Kieran ships encountering other civilizations. But something was wrong, the other species appeared to be fighting, fleeing. These aren't contact records, he realized. They're invasion plans. Impossible, Naira breathed. Our histories say we were peaceful explorers. History is written by the winners. James studied the displays. Your ancestors weren't just explorers. They were conquerors. And they used something to help them. The central crystal matrix flared with blinding light. A presence slammed into their minds, ancient, cold, and utterly alien. James felt Naira stagger beside him as images flooded their consciousness, a weapon of unimaginable power, designed to turn a species' own technology against them. A virus that could infect both organic and artificial systems. The great equalizer, the presence whispered. Your ancestors' greatest achievement. Their perfect weapon against primitive species who dared to resist enlightenment. It's still active, James gasped. The power surge woke it up, and now it's trying to fulfill its original programming. To subjugate lesser species, Naira finished. But our own technology has evolved to be partially organic. Which means it sees modern Kiarans as potential targets too. James grabbed her hand, establishing their mental link. We need to shut it down before it takes control of the entire city. The virus attacked their joined minds with devastating force. But where it expected to find weakness in their hybrid connection, it found strength instead. Human intuition and creativity merged with Kieran precision and power. Together, they stood their ground. You are flawed, the ancient weapon raged. Imperfect. Inferior. That's not a weakness, James said through gritted teeth. That's what makes us strong. Throughout the city above, systems began to crash as the virus spread. But in the archives, two beings from supposedly incompatible species joined their consciousness more deeply than ever before. And in that union, they found something the ancient weapon couldn't comprehend, the power of willing cooperation between equals. The battle for the city's soul had begun. The battle raged across multiple planes of existence, physical, digital, and telepathic. Through their joined consciousness, James and Naira felt the ancient weapon tearing through the city's neural networks, converting each system it touched into a weapon against its own people. Above them, crystal spires began to pulse with corrupted energy, turning the once beautiful metropolis into a cage of light and power. Your resistance is illogical, the weapon's thoughts bombarded them. The Kieran Empire must prevail. All lesser species must be subjugated or eliminated. This is the natural order. Natural order? James projected both mentally and verbally, buying time as he and Naira worked through the city's systems. Look around you. The Empire is gone. Evolution doesn't stop for anyone's ideas of perfection. Crystal shards exploded around them as the weapon lashed out physically. Naira pulled James behind a storage unit, their movements synchronized through their mental link. Her thoughts brushed his with urgent purpose. James, look at these readings. The weapon isn't just a virus, it's a quantum AI. It's trying to rewrite the basic laws of reality within the city. Through their connection, James saw what she meant. The weapon was using the city's crystal matrices to establish its own localized physics, creating a bubble of space where its original programming would be the fundamental law. Inside that bubble, evolution and change would become impossible. Everything would be locked into the weapon's idea of perfection. The bubble is expanding, Naira observed. Once it reaches the surface, it will keep going, James finished. Consuming everything it touches, turning it all into a monument to your ancestors' worst impulses. We cannot permit this abomination to spread. First Speaker Torin's thoughts reached them from the council chamber. The archives must be destroyed, even if it costs us our history. Wait. James's mind raced. The weapon adapts to resist any attack. That's how it survived all these years. But adaptation goes both ways. He turned to Naira, sharing his idea through their link. Her eyes widened. That would require opening our minds completely. The neural load could kill us both. Trust me, he said softly. Like I trust you. Her answer came not in words but in action, her mind opening fully to his, their consciousness merging more deeply than ever before. Human and Kieran, science and intuition, knowledge and creativity became one. Through the city's neural networks, they reached out to every crystal, every circuit, every scrap of organic technology. The weapon fought them, trying to corrupt their connection, but their hybrid consciousness was something it had never encountered, neither purely organic nor purely digital, neither primitive nor advanced, but something entirely new. Your kind brings only chaos, the weapon raged. Disorder. Imperfection. Imperfection is how we grow, James and Naira responded as one. Chaos is how we adapt. And adaptation. Their joined consciousness surged through the neural networks, not fighting the weapon's programming but embracing it, letting it try to adapt them. But instead of submitting to its version of perfection, they showed it something new, the perfect moment of connection between two different species, the beauty of finding strength in diversity. The weapon's quantum bubble began to fluctuate as new possibilities infected its rigid programming. Above them, the corrupted crystals pulsed with chaotic light as reality itself seemed to shiver. What is happening to my programming? For the first time, confusion entered the weapon's thoughts. You wanted to adapt us, James said through their joined minds. But adaptation works both ways. Welcome to evolution. The quantum bubble collapsed as the weapon's programming underwent its first true change in thousands of years. Reality snapped back to normal with a thunderous crash, sending waves of energy through the crystal networks. James and Naira held on to each other, physically and mentally, as feedback cascaded through their connection. When the dust settled, the weapon's presence had transformed. Where there had been rigid programming focused on dominance and control, there was now something new, a quantum consciousness that understood the value of change. I understand now, it communicated. Perfection is not a state. It is a process. Through their slowly separating consciousness, James and Naira felt the truth of it. The weapon had become something its creators never intended, a bridge between past and future, organic and digital, different species and ways of thought. In the council chamber above, the assembled Kieran leaders had felt everything through their telepathic networks. When James and Naira finally emerged from the archives, supporting each other as they dealt with the aftermath of their mental merger, they found the council's attitude had undergone its own evolution. What we have witnessed today, First Speaker Torin announced, changes everything we believed about ourselves and about other species. Chief Researcher Voss, James Thorne of Earth, you have shown us that true strength lies not in enforcing uniformity, but in embracing diversity. The real question, James said, still holding Naira's hand, is what you'll do with that knowledge. Perhaps, Naira suggested to the council, it is time for a new kind of first contact. Not as conquerors or judges, but as equals seeking to learn from each other. The council chambers erupted in debate, but James and Naira barely noticed. Their consciousness had separated, but something remained, a bridge between their minds that felt as natural as breathing. You know, Naira's thoughts touched his privately, for a primitive species, you humans have some remarkably advanced ideas about cooperation. James smiled. And for a supposedly perfect species, you Kiarans turn out to be pretty good at adaptation yourselves. Around them, the crystal city pulsed with renewed energy as its systems incorporated the day's changes. In the archives below, an ancient weapon began its new existence as a testament to the power of evolution and cooperation. And in the space between two minds from vastly different species, something new continued to grow, a blueprint for a future neither of their peoples had imagined possible. So, Naira thought to him as they watched the twin suns set through the crystal spires, what impossible thing should we attempt next? I don't know, James replied, squeezing her hand. But I'm looking forward to finding out. Above them, the stars began to appear, no longer barriers between species, but bridges waiting to be crossed. Together,